It was a sunny afternoon when Jordan, a quiet 17-year-old, decided to visit the local car dealership. Ever since he was young, he had dreamed of owning a car. But today, he wasn't there to buy. He wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, he just wanted to look, to admire the shiny, expensive cars he hoped to one day own. Jordan walked through the dealership, his footsteps quiet on the polished floors. He glanced at the sleek sports cars lined up along the showroom. They were perfect, gleaming under the bright lights. His eyes lingered on one in particular, a red sports car that made his heart race. It was beautiful, but it felt out of reach. He was just a teenager after all, with no money of his own. Lost in his thoughts, Jordan didn't hear the footsteps approaching behind him. He didn't notice the man, dressed in a sharp suit, walking up to him until he was standing right beside him. "Can I help you, kid?" The man asked in a voice that was colder than Jordan expected. The man's eyes were filled with judgment, as if he had already decided Jordan was wasting his time. Jordan looked up, slightly startled. "I'm just looking," he said, trying to sound casual. But the man, who Jordan quickly recognized as Greg, one of the salespeople, wasn't interested in hearing that. He crossed his arms and looked Jordan up and down, as if deciding whether he was even worthy of being in the showroom. "We don't have time for dreamers," Greg said, his voice sharp. Jordan's face flushed slightly, but he remained calm. He had been judged like this before. People assumed he wasn't capable of achieving much because of the way he looked. But he didn't let it bother him. He had learned long ago to ignore the harsh words of others. "Okay, thanks," Jordan said, taking a step back. He didn't want to cause trouble. He wasn't looking to buy anything, and he certainly didn't want to argue. He turned to leave, hoping to just escape the tension in the air. As he walked towards the door, he heard Greg's voice again, this time speaking to someone else. Jordan stopped for a moment, unsure of what was going on. He turned slightly to see Greg talking to a security guard who had appeared out of nowhere. "Keep an eye on him," Greg said, his voice low but clear. "He's just wasting our time. I don't want him hanging around here." The words stung. Jordan's heart sank, but he didn't show it. He kept walking, hoping to make it out without any more trouble. But as he reached the door, the security guard stepped forward and blocked his way. "Excuse me, kid," the guard said in a stern voice, "but you need to leave." Jordan was confused. He didn't know what was going on. "What's the problem?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "The problem is you're not supposed to be here," the guard said. "Greg says you're causing trouble." Jordan's eyes widened. How could he be causing trouble? He was just looking at cars. He had done nothing wrong. "Wait a second," Jordan said, his voice trembling slightly. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just looking." The guard didn't listen. Instead, he stepped closer, his hand hovering near his belt. Jordan felt a rush of panic. Was he about to be kicked out for simply walking around? As Jordan stood there, unsure of what to do next, he noticed something strange. A woman had just walked into the dealership. She had an air of confidence that immediately caught his attention. She was tall, dressed in a professional outfit, and her presence seemed to shift the entire atmosphere in the room. The woman scanned the showroom, her eyes moving from the cars to the people. When her gaze landed on Jordan, she stopped. Something about the way she looked at him made him feel seen, like she was paying attention to him in a way no one else had. She seemed to know something was wrong, even before Jordan had the chance to explain. Before he could say anything, she walked over to the guard and Greg. There was no panic in her steps, no sign of rushing. She moved with purpose, as if she owned the place. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her voice calm but commanding. Greg looked uneasy. He stammered, "This kid." The woman raised her hand, cutting him off. "I asked you a question." Greg hesitated before looking at the guard. "He's just wasting our time," Greg repeated. "He's not buying anything." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Is that a reason to treat someone this way?" Jordan felt a sense of relief. She wasn't yelling, she wasn't upset, but there was something in her voice that made Greg and the security guard stop in their tracks. It was the kind of power that came from someone who didn't need to raise their voice to be heard. Jordan's mind raced. Who was this woman? And why was she taking his side? Jordan stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. The woman's words were simple, but the way she spoke them, with such certainty, gave him a strange sense of reassurance. Who was she? And why did she seem to know exactly what was happening? The security guard and Greg stood motionless, clearly caught, off guard by her sudden authority. The woman turned to face them, her posture straight and commanding. "Would you mind telling me exactly what's going on here?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with a quiet strength. Greg shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting to be questioned. "This kid," he began, "was hanging around, wasting our time. I asked him to leave, but he refused." The woman's eyes narrowed. "I see," she said, her tone sharp. "And how exactly was he wasting your time? By looking at cars?" Greg seemed to struggle. For a response, his words coming out slower. "Well, he didn't look like he could afford anything in here." Jordan's stomach churned. He had expected to be treated like this, but hearing it out loud, from a stranger, made it feel worse. He couldn't understand why it was always so easy for people to judge him. The woman, still not raising her voice, turned toward him. "Jordan," she said softly, "are you all right?" The fact that she knew his name surprised him. He nodded, trying to mask his discomfort. Then turning back to Greg, she smiled, a smile that felt more like a warning than anything else. "I'm going to need you to step aside, Greg. You're making a mistake." Greg's face flushed, but he didn't budge. "I don't know who you think you are," he snapped, "but this is my dealership and you have no right to question my authority." The woman didn't react to his outburst. She simply looked at him, unwavering. "Actually," she said, her tone cool and steady, "I do have the right." Greg was about to respond when the woman reached into her purse and pulled out a card. She handed to him without saying a word. Greg took it, glanced at the card, and immediately his expression changed. His face paled and his eyes widened with shock. "Your name is," he stammered. Jordan was just as confused as Greg. Who was this woman, and why was she holding such power over the situation? Before Greg could say anything more, the woman turned to Jordan. "It's all right now," she reassured him. "You can go ahead and sit down. Let's talk." Jordan followed her instructions without question, but his mind raced. Who was she, and how had she just taken control of the situation so effortlessly? As they sat down at one of the dealership's empty tables, the woman finally spoke again. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that, Jordan," she said, her tone softening. "No one should treat you like that." Jordan couldn't find the words to explain how he felt. Part of him wanted to ask her how she knew his name, or why she was helping him. But before he could speak, the woman raised her hand to stop him. "You must be wondering who I am," she said with a slight smile. "I'll get to that." Jordan nodded, still trying to process everything. It felt like his world had suddenly flipped, upside down. Just moments ago, he had been a quiet teenager looking at cars, and now he was sitting across from a woman who seemed to hold some kind of power that he couldn't understand. "I'm the owner of this dealership," the woman said, almost as if reading his mind. "I've been away on business for a few weeks, and when I heard about what happened today, I wanted to make sure you knew who I was." Jordan blinked in disbelief. "You guys own this place?" The woman nodded. "Yes, I'm Emma, and I'm the one who signs the checks around here." Emma's words hung in the air, and for the first time, Jordan felt a sense of relief. This wasn't just some random woman helping him out. She was someone with real power, someone who could change the outcome of this whole situation. "But," Emma continued, "I didn't expect my employees to treat you like that. You were just looking at cars. You deserve better than that." Jordan didn't know what to say. He had expected this entire experience to be humiliating, but Emma's calmness made it feel like he was finally being seen. Not as a teenager or someone who didn't belong, but as a person who deserved respect. "And let's get something straight," Emma said, her voice now firm. "Nobody here is going to treat you like that again. Greg overstepped, and he'll be held accountable." Greg had been silent the entire time, his face red with embarrassment. Jordan could see that he was struggling to process what was happening, but Emma didn't seem to care. She was in control now, and Greg knew it. "Now," Emma said, turning back to Jordan, "what brings you here today? I'll make sure you get the full experience, and that nobody questions your right to be here." Jordan sat back in his chair, still processing everything. He had come in to look at cars, and now it seemed like he was getting an entirely different kind of attention. The footsteps grew louder and Jordan's heart started racing again. The manager, Mr. Reed, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard, came up to their table with an anxious look on his face. His eyes flickered nervously from Emma to Jordan, clearly aware that something had shifted in the room. "Is everything okay?" Emma asked, her voice still calm but with an edge of authority that made it clear she wasn't pleased with what had been happening. Mr. Reed cleared his throat. I wanted to talk to you about what happened earlier. There seems to be some confusion." Emma didn't blink. "Confusion," she repeated, her eyes narrowing. "Explain yourself." Jordan watched the exchange, still unsure of how to feel. He had been on the receiving end of judgment for most of his life, but this was different. This was power. And for the first time, he wasn't the one who felt powerless. "Well," Mr. Reed stammered, "Greg, he acted on his own. He thought Jordan was just some random kid wasting time, and I guess he took it too far. I'll be speaking with him about this, but I just wanted to apologize for the misunderstanding." Emma leaned forward slightly. "A misunderstanding? You've got a lot of nerve calling it that. Greg didn't just misunderstand something. He overstepped, and I won't tolerate that kind of behavior in my dealership. You should know that by now." Mr. Reed's face turned bright red, and he nodded, quickly. "Of course, I understand, Emma. It won't happen again." Jordan, still silent, couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and confusion. He had been prepared to walk out of the dealership feeling humiliated, but now everything had shifted. He wasn't the one being judged anymore. He was being protected. Emma stood up from the table and turned to Jordan. "Let's take a look at the cars you were interested in, shall we?" Jordan felt a lump form in his throat. She was treating him like he belonged, like he was just as worthy of being there as anyone else. "Are you sure?" Jordan asked, hesitant. "I mean, after everything, I don't want to cause more trouble." Emma smiled warmly, but her eyes held a depth of understanding. "You've done nothing wrong, Jordan. This is your moment. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." The manager, still standing awkwardly by the table, seemed to realize that he had been dismissed. He turned to leave, but not before giving Jordan an apologetic glance. Jordan stood up and followed Emma as she led him toward the cars. The showroom, once intimidating and out of reach, now felt different. It wasn't just a place where rich people went to buy expensive cars. It was a place where he, a teenager from a quiet neighborhood, could walk freely without feeling out of place. As they walked, Emma began talking about the cars, sharing little details about the models. Jordan couldn't believe how easily she made him feel included. He had expected her to treat him like an outsider, but instead she made him feel like a customer, like someone who mattered. They stopped in front of a sleek black sports car, and Jordan's eyes widened. It was the kind of car he had always dreamed of, the one he'd seen in magazines and on TV. He had never imagined that he could actually be standing next to one, let alone think about driving it. Emma noticed the way he was looking at the car and smiled. "You like this one?" Jordan nodded, his mouth dry. "It's amazing. But he couldn't afford something like this, not yet anyway." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Never say never. Sometimes the most unlikely people end up driving the cars they dream about." Jordan didn't know how to respond. He had never thought of himself as someone who could own a car like this. But somehow, in this moment, standing next to Emma, he felt like it might be possible. Greg's footsteps echoed across the showroom as he slowly approached Emma and Jordan. His posture was tense, and his face, usually confident, was now full of discomfort. Jordan couldn't help but notice the difference in his demeanor compared to earlier. He had been so sure of himself before, almost cocky, but now he was a man who seemed to have lost his sense of control. Emma raised an eyebrow, her expression calm but expectant. What is it, Greg? Greg cleared his throat, fumbling with his words. I wanted to apologize for what happened earlier. I made a mistake. I didn't know who Jordan was, and I handled the situation all wrong. Emma didn't say anything. Right away. She just watched him with a cool, unwavering gaze. Jordan, standing next to her, could feel the tension in the air. He had never seen someone like Greg so unsettled before. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice steady. A mistake. You were rude and disrespectful to my guest. And then you called security on him for no reason. Do you have any idea what that could have done to him? Greg shifted uncomfortably. I was just doing my job, Emma, but I admit I was wrong to assume things about him. I didn't know he was, connected to you. Jordan, still silent, glanced at Emma. He had a feeling Greg wasn't talking about his own job anymore. There was something about the way Greg said connected that made him realize just how big of a mistake he had made by underestimating him. Emma turned to Jordan, her eyes softening for a moment. Jordan, she said, her tone gentle but firm, this is exactly why I don't like people making assumptions based on appearances. You are a lot more than what people see on the surface. Remember that. Greg stood there awkwardly, his face turning redder by the second. I understand now, Emma. I'll make sure this never happens again. Emma, still holding her composure, glanced at him one last time. You'd better, Greg. I don't take these things lightly. Then, without another word, she turned her attention back to Jordan. Let's move on, she said, her smile returning. You deserve a proper tour. You came here to look at cars, not to deal with unnecessary drama. Greg, who had been hoping for some sort of sympathy or forgiveness, received none. He swallowed hard and nodded, quickly retreating back to the office area with his head hung low. Jordan's eyes followed him as he left. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted not just in Greg, but in the whole dealership. They had underestimated him, and now they knew they had made a huge mistake. Emma led Jordan to the next car, a bright red sports car that seemed to shine under the showroom lights. It was sleek and elegant, the kind of car that turned heads. The moment it drove down the street, Jordan's heart skipped a beat as he looked at it. This was the moment he had always dreamed of. He had always imagined himself behind the wheel of a car like this, but he had never thought it would be this close to reality. As Emma talked about the features of the car, Jordan listened intently. She didn't just talk about the car's specs. She made him feel like he could actually own it. She treated him with respect, like he belonged in this world. But just as they were about to move on to the next model, Jordan caught a glimpse of Greg watching them from the office window. His eyes were narrowed and his posture was stiff. It seemed like he was waiting for something, but what? Emma noticed Jordan's gaze and followed his eyes. Her expression hardened slightly as she caught sight of Greg. As they walked through the showroom, the tension was palpable. Greg's eyes never left them, and it was clear he wasn't done trying to salvage his position. His attempt to push Jordan out had failed, but that didn't mean he would stop trying to save face. It was only a matter of time before his pride caught up with him. Emma, however, remained calm. She continued to show Jordan around, explaining the cars with a level of enthusiasm that made him feel like he was the most important person in the room. But every now and then she would glance toward Greg, her eyes sharp and calculating. The silence between them grew heavier as they walked, until Emma finally spoke again, her voice steady but with an underlying edge. You know, Jordan, she said, sometimes it takes more than just money to own a car dealership. It takes connections, power, and influence. And not everyone realizes that. Jordan wasn't sure what she meant at first, but something in her tone made him pause. What do you mean? He asked. Curiosity piqued. Emma stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Greg thinks he can throw his weight around because he works here. He doesn't realize who I really am, but that's about to change. Jordan felt a chill run down his spine. What was she saying? Who was she, really? As if on cue, Greg approached them again. This time his posture was more rigid, almost defensive. His eyes flicked nervously from Emma to Jordan. Emma, Greg began, his voice lower than before. I'm sorry about the misunderstanding. I was out of line earlier, but you know how things are here." Emma didn't let him finish. She turned to Jordan and smiled, a knowing smile that sent a shiver down his back. "Greg, why don't you take a seat for a moment?" she said, her tone cool and dismissive. Greg blinked, taken aback. "What?" "But sit down," Emma repeated firmly. With no other choice, Greg reluctantly pulled up a chair near the front desk. Emma turned back to Jordan, her gaze unwavering. "Let's finish this tour," she said, as if nothing had happened. The two of them continued their walk through the showroom, but now there was an undeniable shift. The energy in the air felt different, charged. It was as if Jordan had crossed into a whole new world, one where Emma held all the cards. As they reached the final car in the showroom, Emma turned to Jordan, her smile returning. "So, what do you think? Is there one that catches your eye?" Jordan hesitated. He had always dreamed of owning a car like this, but now he was more intrigued by the person showing it to him. Emma wasn't just a businesswoman. She was something far more powerful than that. As Jordan stood there, processing the chaos unfolding around him, he could feel the weight of the situation settling over him like a thick fog. Emma had vanished into the back office, leaving Greg standing there, his face flushed red with anger. The showroom felt eerily quiet now, the earlier buzz of customers and salespeople now drowned out by the tension in the air. Greg took a step forward, his hands shaking. "You don't know what you're messing with, kid," he muttered under his breath. "This is my territory and you don't belong here." Jordan could feel the heat rising in Greg's voice, but he wasn't scared. Something about the way Emma had handled him earlier made him realize that this wasn't just about cars or sales. It was about power, the kind of power that Emma held, a power that Greg had just barely started to grasp. Before Jordan could respond, Emma emerged from the back office, her expression calm, almost regal. In her hands she held a folder that looked important, official. She walked up to Greg, who now seemed to shrink under her gaze. "Greg," she said, her voice low and controlled, "I think it's time you knew the truth." Greg's eyes narrowed. "What truth?" He spat, clearly not ready to back down. Emma didn't hesitate. She opened the folder and slid out a piece of paper, holding it up for him to see. It was a document, a company ownership record. "You've been working for me all along, Greg. You just didn't know it." Greg's face drained of color. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked at the paper, then back at Emma, and then to Jordan, who was now watching the entire exchange with wide eyes. You're the owner?" Greg stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma nodded slowly, her eyes unwavering. "That's right. My mother owns the dealership, and I've been managing it for years. You were just a pawn in a game you didn't even know you were playing." Greg looked like he'd just been struck. His whole demeanor shifted, from aggressive to defeated. He turned away, pacing in the small space between the cars, clearly trying to process the revelation. Jordan stood there, still processing everything. He had come in as a kid looking for a car, only to find himself standing in the middle of a corporate power struggle, one that he never could have imagined. And now he knew that everything was about to change, for both Greg and for him. Emma turned to Jordan, a slight smile on her lips. "I think it's time to discuss your options," she said, clearly ready to wrap things up and move on. But before she could lead him to the desk, Greg turned back to face them, his expression dark and angry. "You think this is over?" he asked, his voice a dangerous growl. "You think you can just come in here and take control of everything? You'll regret this, Emma. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." Emma's smile didn't falter. "Oh, I think I know exactly what I'm getting into, Greg, and I'm not afraid." She motioned for Jordan to follow her as she walked towards the back office once again, leaving Greg standing there, fuming with rage. As they entered the office, Emma closed the door behind them. She looked at Jordan, her expression softer now. "I know this is a lot to take in, but you handled yourself well out there. I can tell you're someone who doesn't let people push him around." Jordan nodded, still a little shocked. I just wanted to buy a car, he said quietly. I didn't know any of this was going on. Emma's eyes sparkled with something almost like amusement. That's the thing, Jordan. Most people never realize the power plays happening behind the scenes. But you're not like most people. She gestured to the desk, where she pulled out a set of keys. So, what do you say? Want to pick out your dream car?